About a week ago, I downloaded Bryan Johnson's Don't Die app on the Android Google Play Store for the first time, and I was very intrigued. I had been waiting. I had checked the downloads for this app again and again and again, mostly because I have been following Bryan Johnson, and I think not that everything he is doing is great. Of course, there is some criticism to be made in the positive, but also in the negative, but I obviously I have been copying many different parts, but just like everybody else, there are things that one wants to emulate, maybe things one doesn't want to emulate. Nonetheless, he is, I think, to a certain extent, still kind of leading this health optimization movement, and he is making many things a reality that I, for myself, for example, have not yet implemented. And so I was quite excited to try out this app. So the app has kind of a couple of different parts to it. The first is a social media feed. Everybody can post. Now, there you can also follow people, so it is kind of a social media app to a certain extent. But then there is also the score portion. So you do have a score, and the score is calculated based on 3 inputs. So here are these 3 inputs, and this is also my score for today. So the first one is calories burned. So the goal is to burn 350 activity calories. I at least assume these are activity calories. So these are activities that are basically on top of your basal metabolic rate. Then you also have the goal of 3.5k steps. You also then have the goal of 7 hours sleep. So there is no sleep quality metric or something like this. It is just the duration. So why did they decide for 6 hours? Or not for 6, but for 7 hours, and not for 6 hours or 8 hours? I think mostly because if now people usually sleep 8 hours, but then maybe they sleep a little bit less than 8 hours, then they would not hit the goal. If then the goal would only be 6 hours, then maybe also people could get through who only sleep 6 hours actually. But what has also to be said is that if you spend, so there are kind of 2 filters down of sleep duration. The first one is time spent in bed does not equal sleep duration. So basically there is already a trickle down. So basically the time you spent awake, which is already showing on many devices, is deducted from the time spent in bed, which is then resulting in the normal sleep duration, not the normal sleep duration, but the resulting sleep duration. And then again, you have another filter, which is how much of this time you then actually sleep, of the time you spend in bed, you then have tracked on a device. And so then the next filter is how much of this time that is now recorded in Google Fit, in Samsung Health, in Whoop, is then transferred also to the app. And since the app is kind of it is out of beta, but it still has many bugs, so you might not have your sleep duration synchronized properly. Now there are people already in the app that have a streak, basically fulfilling all of these 3 goals. If you fulfill all of these 3 goals, so basically 350 burned calories, then we have 3.5k steps for a day, and then we also have 7 hours, basically within the 24 hours that is the day. Then you get a 100% score. And now you can also get a streak, and the streak is then just a continued 100% score. Now you also get the rank, which is basically showing the global rank. Now, this could be on a weekly basis, this also could be on a monthly basis, and also on a yearly basis. So I think there are these 3 different distinctions. So I downloaded the app, and I also then started posting on the app. Now, posting on the app is not quite easy, because the images as of now are usually in reversed order, and if you insert the images, then they are displayed over the text, and so you cannot really write after you inserted an image. And so there are many things like this, many quirks that maybe might be worked out in the future. Now, Bryan Johnson is on the app. In total, at least as I joined, there were 3.7k people on the app, which is something I deducted from the info that Bryan Johnson follows everybody and also is followed by everybody. So everybody who signs up automatically follows Bryan Johnson. I think they can opt out of this, but it seems to be the case that this is the initial setup, which then means that the numbers that are displayed on Bryan Johnson's account when I registered, it was 3.7k, is actually all of the registered accounts. So now I don't know how other social media sites calculate the user base. So this could be that someone has to be active for maybe 10 minutes a month or something like this, but at least the registered accounts as of sign up were 3.7k. A couple of days later now, I think they are sitting at 4.3k or something like this. So now there are basically not that many users on the app yet, but there is also not an incline, but a sharp trend upwards. So I calculated within this weekly time span that this already was quite, so basically within a couple of months they would hit 1 million or something like this. This is something I not calculated, but I extrapolated from this data. If this trend like this continues, then this would be the user base. I thought I already stopped the video. one solution for the problem of how to basically, if there is something that is not automatically imported, then the decision responsibility is on me which data I do import and whether I just choose to import the best data. I have seen, for example, on some profiles that for systolic and diastolic blood pressure, they just imported apparently very low blood pressure. But this, to a certain extent, one could say, is not really doing the normal dataset justice. So what I have been doing, at least as I had the Omron Evolve, is that whenever there was like an input, so my gym has a app, and in this app there is a company, so the app is made by a company that is called eGym that also makes smart eGym machines or smart machines where you can measure your 1 rep max test in a kind of standardized way. So this could be a pull, this could be a chest press, and so on these devices I basically have somewhat standardized a 1 rep max calculated, and this then calculates also a strength age. And now for the cardiovascular portion, I also import manually again, or copy paste manually, my VO2 max. Now ideally, this decision responsibility and optimization responsibility of data picking would be outsourced to an algorithm, because otherwise I can also manipulate this. If, for example, I go to the gym and I fast for 2 days before and I then stand on the body composition scale, then I might have at least a lower weight, which might also result in a lower visceral fat calculation, compared to if I go to the gym and I actually I have also eaten for the gym. So there is also maybe this problem that if I go to the gym and I want to first weigh myself, then I am not fueled properly for the workout afterwards, which is then again an entirely different story. So what I'm trying to say here is that on this app I also had to decide, on the eGym app I also had to decide how often do I import my VO2 max, for example. And what I landed on is that it would make sense to not pick my best VO2 max, because what happens if I only import, basically if I have a new PR. If I only import if I have a new PR, this would be a nice and easy rule. But what this also would mean is that I basically, if I for maybe 1 week, or maybe for 2 weeks, or maybe for 4 weeks, or maybe for 6 years, don't have a new PR, then this data eventually doesn't represent what I'm actually capable of any longer. So what I'm actually capable of changes all the time. So if I do a set of bench press, then what I'm capable, so basically my biological bench press age goes down like crazy after I did just a bench press set. And so of course now, again, back to sampling. So the question, this question has to a certain extent been solved by the app team by already displaying an average. So you can now import basically data with timestamps. In the beginning this wasn't possible, you could only enter one data point at basically the current timestamp. So the timestamp equals the timestamp of entering. But what you now can do is backdate, even though in theory only, because practically it's kind of very hard because there is a bug, or there are multiple bugs that kind of prevent oneself from entering the data correctly. So now if I go into this app and I import 1 leg standing, or I record data 1 leg standing, and so on and so forth, I can basically timestamp this data, which then represents actually what actually I am capable of. And so what I have been thinking more and more is that data recorded and also maybe represented on devices or on platforms like these should kind of ideally represent my actual capability as much as possible. But of course the biological age, the strength age, for example, that is calculated in the eGym app, then should it go up and down like 41 years after a bench press set, then it goes down to, if after 2 days it goes down to 31 years because I'm now recovered, and so on and so forth, which brings up the question of comparability, but also of actually then seeing long-term trends, and again maybe results in a standardized measurement like resting heart rate or like resting blood pressure, or maybe also like grip strength, but only measured in the morning and not after a strength training session in the gym. Now let's take a look at the app, actually at a little bit of basically with the app itself. The reason I didn't show it before was because I had a process going on my phone which kind of prevented me from showing this. So now, first of all, this is now what my profile looks with the score. So we have a score of 86. In the last couple of days I didn't hit a score at all, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is also what has been happening. What we also can see is my current global rank that's based on the monthly ranking, and then we also can see my best streak, which in this case is a 1 day, which is not very good, I guess. There are people who already have maybe hundreds of days, I think, of streaks. Then there is also the current streak, which in my case is again 0. In the score portion of the app, there are now 3 sections. The first one is the score itself, then we also have XPs. You can get XPs also by doing something else compared to just entering this fitness data automatically, which is that you can engage with the community, which is kind of incentivizing yourself to comment on 3 different posts. But you can also have so you can also share your own journey, which is giving you 1 XP, and then you can also get a perfect score, which gives you also 1 XP. So this is also maybe interesting in terms of choice architecture, or rather in this case of, one could call it gamification. Let's just call it gamification. So it's basically equally important. So basically, it is equally important in terms of a third, whether I engage with the community and comment on 3 posts, whether I get a perfect score, or whether I share my journey. So somebody who has a perfect score all the time gets only a third of all the XPs, one could say. Or somebody who is basically posting once a day and also commenting 3 times a day is already getting 2/3 of the XPs one could get. And the XPs to a certain extent seem to also then contribute to the monthly rank, but I don't know in which regard or basically what the function in this case is. There is also a campaign option which is currently not available, and the campaigns are coming soon. Then there is also the badges, which are also not available yet. So the only badge that seems to be available is kind of the streak. At least the streak looks like a badge. If we again take a look at this. So down here you can see the streak badges, and they also kind of look very similar, almost identical to the badges. Now you can set up a couple of devices. I connected my Google account, I connected also my Garmin account, and if there now is a situation in which there are 2 datasets, maybe on my Garmin, I do wear a Garmin watch as well as a Samsung watch when sleeping, and so if the Samsung watch now has recorded more sleep, what then is counted in the app? And I asked this, and the one developer of the app said that it would always take the better one. So which is better for me. So basically, if there are 2 devices and you have 2 devices on you, you could also wear 5 devices and then also basically level yourself up by having the best sleep, not the best sleep score, but the best sleep duration, which then makes sure that you have the most XPs out of basically fulfilling the 7-hour sleep goal. You then also have access to a history, so you have the weekly history, the monthly, as well as the yearly history, and at one point it actually calculated 23,000 points for me, but then I disconnected this account again. I actually deleted the first account I had accidentally, and so now my score is 8,100 points for the last year. Now there are also a couple of other things as well. So basically it also shows you apparently the monthly average, which in this case you can see here, and it says 0 hours and 59 minutes of sleep is my monthly sleep average. It also shows my monthly average of 4 activities, which I now assume are for the day, and then I have 83 calories burned, which is also probably not very accurate, and then I also have 7.7 steps, 7.7k steps, which probably then is accurate. You can also then see the activity history, so BMR calories, which are basically calculated maybe. I don't know if they are synchronized, so basically I don't know if Garmin synchronizes or has separate categories that also would be able to be synchronized to basically a third-party app like this that would be separated into BMR as well as activity calories. At least within Garmin it shows you basically these 2 different buckets. Now, in your own page, if you go basically onto your own page, this is now what it looks like, and this is what it also looks like if you post, and then you can just post something. Like for example, I posted about the run I did yesterday. I also created already a group, which is the Garmin Club, which you could potentially join. And in the Garmin, so what are groups? Just like on every other social media platform, you can join, people can join, there is an administrator, and then people can discuss in this. If you post in a group, the post seems to be not public, but only visible to the members of the group, even though you can kind of go into a group currently, and there seems to be no private group. You don't have to be accepted into a group, but you can just join a group. There is also a section just for the groups, so you can, for example, explore different groups like these here. So there is the Don't Die app development group. There are also a couple of other groups as well, and you can then select also your hosting. And in the future, maybe there are also events. I don't know. Actually, there are already events. So you could, for example, go to these events, and then there are a certain amount of spots left. Previously, Bryan or the Blueprint or the Don't Die team organized these events on, first of all, Discord. Then they made kind of a switch to the platform River, which is kind of still kind of the main thing, I think, and maybe they try to then switch it over to this here. I also saw once that on Twitter there was a Don't Die group, so maybe they're trying on multiple platforms, but it seems to be the case that maybe if they are building the platform themselves, that eventually this is where all the groups and the events should be kind of natively be hosted. There is also the feed, but the feed just hosts the post. I don't want to show any posts because otherwise I might get copyright strikes or something like this. Not that I would actually get, but maybe I just don't want to show this as of right now. You already saw what a post looks like on one of my posts. Then there is also now a shopping feature, which basically is just so you basically can shop all of the Blueprint products now within this. What I previously didn't know is that they now also sold the speed of aging test, a Blueprint branded at least. So the Blueprint, no, the speed of aging test previously has been provided by True Diagnostics. It still seems to be the case this way. They also have this. This is also kind of a sampling problem to a certain extent, one could say, because if you take a speed of aging test and let's say there is a seasonal variability to this, and there is also maybe a daily variability, whereas in the morning you might measure a lower speed of aging. I don't know about this. I don't know if this is actually the case, but maybe there would be a seasonal fluctuation. And then the question is, how often do you sample? And then also the question is, if people sample at certain, if they find out about this and sample basically at certain parts of the year and then get basically better scores compared to other people, then of course there would be a competitional advantage to this. So now they kind of solved this by saying, okay, you get 4 tests a year and then you can basically enrolled. But previously they said it's for 2 years, so maybe they updated it again, and maybe I just shouldn't talk about this if I don't know the specifics of it. But this is kind of what I at least remember. Then there is also the merch that is selling now on the app. If you click on it, it actually doesn't allow you to shop within the app, but it leads you to the website. Then you can also select kind of the subgroups, nutrition with the Blueprint snake oil. Then you can also take tests, and the current 2 tests, or the currently 2 tests that are available, or that are currently available, are the microplastics test, which costs around $150, and the speed of aging test, which I think costs around $450, which is quite expensive, one could also say. And it also, so first of all, I don't know what the margins on this product are, but if I now for myself have to decide whether I take a speed of aging test or I take a couple of blood tests, which is actually, I kind of have a blood test planned, but it's also quite expensive, so I don't know if I do the full panel. But I currently, at least in the last year, I used Inside Tracker. And so I did one Inside Tracker age test, and I got basically a biological age calculation based on my blood work. Now what this gives me is the blood data, so that's the raw data, as well as the calculation. What now this test would give me is probably only the calculation, so I would get this graph, speed of aging, and this is what it looks like. In addition to this, now True Diagnostics, I think also, at least is planning to, also have different organ systems. But again, the question is, would it make, at least currently, more sense to rely on something that is actually more, it's actually closer to the function of the body, and not so much just on the DNA? I don't know. I think it just measures the epigenetics, but just is maybe a word I shouldn't use in this scenario. So what it currently says is that it costs 515 euros and 95 cents if I now would purchase this, but on top of this there would probably be taxes and this other thing that comes on top of taxes if you import from one country to the other. And then tariffs. Donald Trump, I think, calls it tariffs, and these might increase as Donald Trump has been elected and he wants to introduce tariffs, and then you also have the Dundee hat and the shirts. So basically then maybe in the future can subscribe in the app and also maybe manage your subscriptions in the app. And then you still have your profile, and I already showed you the profile. Now on the profile there are a couple of other things as well which I haven't showed you. The first one is the protocols and the second one are the measurements. So now, what are protocols? That's actually a very good question. There is also no description of this. So now, I think to a certain extent at least, one could say Andrew Huberman popularized the protocol. Previously, I think I didn't hear the word, at least with this meaning. I didn't know what he meant by protocol, because at least in the German language, which is my native one, a protocol was something that is kind of similar to a report. Whereas now, Andrew Huberman talked about protocols all the time, and now the whole bio-optimization or health optimization world has taken over Andrew Huberman's protocol. So now there are protocols available. The question is now, what is a protocol? In the simplest terms, what I, at least out of my frame, I would say is, so a protocol is an action that should be executed in the future. So you could also say, to a certain extent, it is a task. So now, the problem with habit tracking, the problem with tasks, and this is also something I have been thinking about for quite some time in the last couple of years. What do I put in a task manager? If now a task manager has the option for recurring tasks, is this now a habit? And what do I then put in a habit tracker? And what do I track that is basically maybe a health habit? Do I track it in the habit tracker? Is it a task? But what if it only occurs once? What if it occurs once in a year? What if it occurs once in a decade and then no longer, because I actually then don't think it's necessary any longer? So now, in terms of my own thinking, I think of habits as things that are repeated tasks. So I track repeated tasks where I don't have to add additional information for the execution of this. If I have an appointment for a doctor's office, as I had a couple of days ago actually, I then make a task, but this is not a recurring task, so I input basically the information I need, and this often is in my case a checklist. Now I then check off these items, and then the task is checked off, and then it appears into Nirvana. Whereas a habit is something I plan to do on a continuous basis. And now a protocol, I think, is a habit one has planned to do for the future, so it's basically just a habit. For this reason, I decided to at least copy-paste a couple of habits. Now, which are the habits I copy-pasted? I basically set an importance threshold. Maybe out of the 350 habits I currently at least intend to track, so it is the protocol to track 350 habits daily, but I don't. So I basically took the most important ones, or the ones that seem to be the most socially acceptable, which is my supplement stack. So now I also, in addition to the supplement stack, have my basic workout routine. So now what I imported here is, or what I copy pasted here from my habit tracker, which is Loop Habits, is greens. So I currently take greens, which are the bulk greens, and then within the habit you can basically define further things. So you have an additional section which is called description or something like this. So there's the title, then there is the description. You can also select a category out of these different options. So this could be nutrition, for example. Taking greens is kind of a nutritional or supplemental thing. Now, then, in addition, you can add basically details. So what I have added here is the protocol goal is best approximation to vegetable intake in powdered form. A meal shake project, depending on discounts, portion costs about 0.6 euros daily. Now the question is, do I write this for myself, if this is copy-pasted from my own documentation, or do I now write this to other people? So you have the option to have this as a draft, but you can also publish this, which again makes it kind of very nice that there is a social aspect to it, and maybe in the future you can kind of crowdsource. So to a certain extent, so I recently watched the Jordan Peterson Richard Dawkins interview, and it talked about the idea of the meme, or rather the meme itself, which to a certain extent seems to be a proxy for an idea, and how, or an idea that is kind of not worth sharing, as Ted would say, but is has a certain not variability, but virality to it. So similar to how a gene is kind of the thing that is optimizing over generations to be in the next pool, and the next gene pool, basically, the idea would be something that is also going from mind to mind, maybe, or in the future, not from mind to mind, but similar to a virus. So you could also simply call it a mind virus, because a virus is usually described as something maybe also with a bad connotation, something that spreads, and that also has a certain spread rate. I don't know the statistical terms of this, but there is an R value, at least in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. This was often used, which is kind of indicating how likely it is to spread to another person. So now the protocol would kind of allow basically sharing these ideas about tasks one could do in the future to optimize health, and basically improve, for one, basically the sharing frequency, similar to how basically with the internet so if we compare stock trading with basically doves that are sent over over maybe weeks from one location to the next, or people that have to carry a message from one location in the empire to the other location in the empire, as we go from this to now being able to instantaneously trade with the internet, then this here, something like this, could basically allow the spread of ideas that are health optimized much faster. So this is basically the trading frequency of these ideas, which this app could allow. This would be one aspect of this. So now, in terms of the other habits I did import my normal supplementation, which is omega-3s, currently 2 a day, and the others are not that important. I also did import one exercise habit, which is the kind of minimum habit I track. So I do have a 10-minute threshold per day, which is now, I further defined it as 10 minutes tracked on a Garmin device, not specifically a Garmin device, but on an activity tracker. So it needs to be a sum of total tracked 10 minutes, but it also cannot be stretching, or it cannot be, I cannot track just walking to the grocery store as an activity, because I don't see it really as exercise, which is also something kind of the Garmin choice architecture system kind of taught me, because previously on the Galaxy, well, it goes into too much detail, I think. So I have the 10 to 20 minutes which is kind of the minimum exercise habit I try to execute. And this is also kind of makes it simpler because it's a daily habit compared to strength training, which is a weekly habit. And then I again have to mention the frequency. But then what happens if I do the Friday workout on a Saturday? Is this then still counting for this week? But what if I then start the week on a Sunday, on a Monday? Daily habits, in this case, I think are easier. And then I also added one recovery habit, which is my cold exposure, which I try to aim at 1 second in a given day. And this is it about the protocols, but we also have the measurement section, and the video is already 25 minutes long. So now the measurement section previously was divided. Basically, there were more sections like this, and the measurement sections were actually also sections like this, which were bigger. So basically one hierarchy up sections. So now you have capabilities, you also have measurements, you also have biomarkers. And these are the three different things. The biomarkers are now mostly blood markers, and they are not anything else but these. Now VO2 max, for example, would be a measurement. And the biomarkers could also maybe, the word biomarkers could also maybe be defined, or could also include maybe other measurements apart from blood biomarkers, but currently these are only blood biomarkers. Now, there are not all the blood markers in the medical system that can be created are in here, but maybe more of the general health ones, one could say. Now the question is also, if I have a biomarker in here, what do I then do with this? Let's take a look at this, which is albumin, which is in this case 4.4 grams per deciliter, and it shows that, so it basically ranks me against the rest of the people that are first of all in this app, but then maybe also, so it now currently is the distribution across all users who measured. And so, as there are currently 3.4k people in this app, a certain portion of this might be 10 people, this might be 250 people, or maybe 3,000 people, but I doubt it because I rarely saw ever blood markers on other people. You can also set the blood markers or the biomarkers private. Then this is measured basically against the other people in the app, similar how in Garmin it usually ranks you against other Garmin users, because that's just the database they kind of have access to, it seems. Then you also have a history, and in this history you then can see the multiple entries you have made. Currently there seems to be no import function, otherwise I could maybe import in the future if they offer also a peak exploratory rate, and then import it via CSV. And the same would be true maybe for other apps as well. In the future, or ideally, an app like this would have automatic integrations such that basically also the responsibility of picking the data would also be outsourced, and therefore a system like this could not be manipulated that easily by me if I just import instead of my average blood pressure for the last year, which is also kind of hard to determine, which is also maybe the reason Garmin doesn't calculate it any longer, and also Samsung doesn't calculate it any longer. Previously they put out a average calculation, so the average blood pressure, and if you then measure once a day in the morning, then you would have a average for the last year, which would be the morning resting blood pressure. There is also a leaderboard which is coming soon, but currently it is not available. Now once you enter, you can also backdate a measurement. Now in terms of the measurements, because I don't want to copy paste my daily body fat measurement in there, what I did input in there is the yearly average, which is calculated on my Garmin Index S2, and then is calculated, the measurement itself is then calculated on Garmin Connect, and then I just, this is basically the yearly average, which I think makes sense to a certain extent, but again, in terms of blood pressure, I don't have a yearly average. I also don't have a yearly average of the biomarker albumin, because I only have albumin maybe at max once a year measured, because it's a blood marker. Then I also have the reaction time, but in here again the question is, do I put in my PR? I actually in the last couple of days now in the morning took a reaction time test, which only takes maybe 30 seconds or maybe it's a minute, because I still have to input that data into somewhere. And currently this is not the Don't Die app, because well, the Don't Die app also has a social aspect to it, which I will, I think, shortly discuss. I also did the one leg standing test, and there is also, if you take a look at the dead hang or the one leg standing test, there is also a short description, and also was already there when I started using this. So in terms of reaction time, I now can see how I rank against other people, and seemingly I rank very terrible against other people, but there is also seems to be at least not that much data in this. So I don't know why I'm in the bottom 50% of users who measure their reaction time in the app. So now the question for me is again, do I input my best attempt? Also within the app there are like, it shows you the attempts, but it also shows you an average out of all of these. The question is then, is this the best? But then if this applies for this, what again for the biomarkers? Do I input my best albumin score, not score, but biomarker of the last 15 years? Or what is then the thing I should do here? And then it again shows you a leaderboard and a reference range. The reference range we could take a look at for pull-ups, I think. but now it is again gone. So the history tab is now showing, at least in terms of continuous pull-ups, basically both at the same time. It shows you the progression over time, but it also shows you the entries you have. One problem, of course, is verifiability. If True Diagnostics, for example, for the speed of aging test, controls the environment, then this cannot be very easily cheated. If now, in addition, the sets, so that basically the points in time at which certain people are tested, are also controlled, which is currently to a certain extent the case, but it is not like all users who basically contribute to the Rejuvenation Olympics, which is basically the other side, which is, so basically there is the epigenetics Dundon speed of aging test, which gives you a speed of aging. So this could be 0.5, for example, or for most people it's not 0.5, but rather something close to 1. So they are aging biologically basically as fast as they are chronologically old. So the easiest way to describe this would be to take the average speed of aging of the last years. So if I am 100 years old and my speed of aging biologically matches basically the time has passed chronologically, then basically the speed of aging is 1. Because I'm dividing 100 years of biological age divided by 100 years of chronological age. But now if I'm only 50 years old, so I'm basically fitter, so there seems to be this correlation between health and age, and the older you are, the unhealthier you are. And also the risk for multiple diseases seems to go up. So if now I'm at 100 chronological years, I'm 50 years biologically, then I have a ratio of 50 to 100, which is then 0.5. And so now, in regards of the Rejuvenation Olympics now, the environment to a certain extent is controlled, and maybe ideally now, and so this outputs basically a speed of aging, and so basically people rank one against the other, which is now not very present on the app, but in the app you also have the ability to input a Dundon pace of aging, which is, I think, a biomarker. So it's a biomarker within the app. Let's talk about the social aspect of it. Currently, it is a app that has a feed. For myself, I have decided that I did not want apps with social feeds, or I cannot really have apps with social feeds on my phone. For this, I made kind of an exception. Initially, it was just an exception. Now, to a certain extent, because I see this at least as a hobby, this health optimization thing and making content about it, I see it to a certain extent as a hobby, and maybe I also wanted to try this at least, and also maybe be involved in the feedback, or basically be giving feedback, and maybe be involved in basically debugging the app to a certain extent. But now, I at multiple times already deinstalled the app. It's like there is a thing that is kind of too good to be true. And this thing that is too good to be true is basically taking out my dopamine to a certain extent. Now this is very simplified, but I think Dr. Carl Gillette on Andrew Huberman, or on Huberman Lab, described dopamine as a wave pool. So you have a wave pool, and there are certain waves within the wave pool. Now, basically the wave pool has to be filled in order for the waves to occur, but the less the wave pool is filled, the less waves also occur. So now, in my kind of personal thinking, I have been thinking about this a lot. If I, for example, in the last couple of years of school, I had piano lessons, and I did not really like piano lessons, mostly because I always was unprepared, because I always was lacking time for preparation, and I always was terrible at playing. So now, I did not really like those. But as soon as I then took those out, basically they were the thing I was the least looking forward to in the week, apart from maybe training. So if I then take a thing that is very hard out of my week, the other things seem to basically, if something is joyful, so is up, and something that is hard is down, if I take out the down things, then the overall hardness seems to be drawn down. So basically the level, the perceived hardness seems to be always averaging. And so basically the wave pool goes above and below. And if I have things that are below, then I can also have the waves going up high, which again would be the wave pool analogy, but it is also in 3D. Because, well, there needs to be a certain volume of water in order to make the waves. But if we now just take a look at the 2D, then I think what is happening, and this also seems to match now the description of Dr. Carl Gillette on Huberman Lab, that if I have very high waves, so one could see this now in both ways, I think. If I have very high waves, then I need to have very low waves. If I take out basically the low portions, and I only try to get the high waves, then the whole wave pool actually would be moving up, but it cannot really, so it actually moves down, and so I have the lows anyway. So basically, if I don't have controlled lows, then I have uncontrolled lows. One could also maybe describe it like this. So if yesterday, for example, I went out for a run, and I did cold exposure in addition to the run being 12K. So now, this was very hard for me. Now, of course, there are things that are very hard, and this was just something that I still could control, and so on and so forth. It also rained, but I also wore a tank top and shorts. So at 6 degrees Celsius, this was now kind of hard, and I was therefore looking forward to then all the other things I could do at home again, if not out in the cold at 6 degrees Celsius. So this was something that was very hard, and therefore at other points of the week I can have something that is very high. If I now have something that is very high, but that's very easily accessible, then I don't have to put in work in order to get the high. And so something like this, which is then social media, which gives me... If, for example, yesterday, in the last couple of days, I also in preparation for a doctor's visit, I had to actually work on this. I had to, put together my blood biomarkers, maybe find out what this could actually attribute to. In the last couple of weeks I had swollen ankles and I didn't really know what to do, and I also didn't really know whether I should train or not, but it was kind of very hard to stand, so this was kind of a problem for me. And so as I was trying to prepare, as I did work basically for this, I was also having access to the app and having access to anything that has a social media feed. In the past, that did turn out to be not a great idea to have an app like this on my phone. So I deinstalled the app, and I also basically decided multiple times to quit the app, but currently I have not quit the app. The problem that has also been, at least in my view, occurring with me on Strava, or on a platform like Strava, is eventually time on the app replaces time in real life, which is actually... So there is an app like this shows basically... So an app like this shows things that are downflowing from doing things in real life. But as soon as basically consuming things in the app or doing things in the app replace actually the things that otherwise would be downstream, the content of the app, or what would you be doing in the app. So as soon as I don't go out for a 20-minute run, even if it is just 20 minutes, but instead I am spending 20 minutes on a health optimization app, then this is probably not a deal I should take in the long term. And so I have been quite conflicted about the usage of this app, and eventually probably I should get rid of this app, at least in terms of deleting it off of my phone, but I probably would still have an account and have the setup synchronized, not the setup synchronized, but basically the synchronization set up such that I basically am still recorded, the data is still recorded, and I'm still having a rank on this app and so on and so forth, because it is, on the other side, still kind of one of the best implementations of health optimization, but in a very gamified way, where you can compare yourself to others. A couple of examples of this. Without Bryan Johnson, I would not know what my peak expiratory flow at this point in time was. I, as a maybe 15-year-old or a 10-year-old, took a couple of peak expiratory flow rate because I had kind of a problem there. And I also took a picture, eventually, again, of basically the device and how I maxed out on the flow rate. But without this, I would not know this. So basically, because Bryan took this, and because he also showed other people on social media what he actually did, what I can now do is I can take this and I can basically get to the end result much faster compared to otherwise. I would not probably have figured out that peak expiratory flow is something that correlates with lung function and so on and so forth, and maybe it's something that I should track, maybe that's something that I should actually invest money in, and then buy the device for the 110 euros, and then maybe also track it over time. But because now Bryan showed this, then I could actually copy paste this to a certain extent and get to basically the functional side of this much faster. And so this is also maybe what the app allows. I asked a couple of questions in the app. I asked, for example, whether somebody had figured out how to import a Sleep Dock Pro from SleepMe into Europe, because they currently seem to only deliver to the US. I also saw it on eBay once, but these are also very expensive, and so on and so forth. So, an app like this creates a community in which you can interact with other people. But if interacting with other people on an app like this takes away from actually doing the work in the first place, that could be working out, that also could be maybe actually increasing your grip strength by going to the gym, that could be taking away from work time, then maybe it's not the best deal. And of course now, similar, so I decided, for example, to not have Twitter on my phone, also not have YouTube on my phone, and so on and so forth, because it just didn't work in the past. And so why would it now work with this app is a question I have asked myself, and the result of this answering myself this question is probably it also doesn't work in the long term, and I should get rid of this because it fulfills all the criteria that I previously said to the other apps no to. It is a social media feed that is on my phone, and that's probably the long term. It's kind of the app allows me to create a protocol, and one of these protocols should be that I should not have this app on my phone.